Listen carefully, because the most dangerous part of America's new $13 billion carrier isn't the ship, it's the idea that built it. Here's the claim that sounds outrageous until you run the numbers. This carrier was not an investment in deterrence. It was the predictable output of a repeating machine, an empire-scale spending pattern that reliably manufactures one outcome, a priceless, centralized asset that can be politically neutralized by cheap, scalable pressure, exactly where escalation is hardest. And that is why it fits Iran's trap. But before you argue with me, lock this in your mind. Iran's trap is not sink the carrier. That's the movie version. The real trap is worse, because it doesn't require a catastrophic battle, it only requires something quieter, making the carrier too risky to use the way it was designed to be used, while the world watches, and markets reprice fear in real time. If you stay until the end, I'll give you the single question that tells you whether we're entering the next stage of the machine without needing classified briefings, headlines, or hot takes. Authority check, because without hard anchors, this sounds like theater. As of Q3 2025, global debt was near $346 trillion, around 310% of global GDP, according to the Institute of International Finance. That matters because a high debt system can't absorb prolonged shocks the way it used to. It can't fund strategic mistakes forever. It can't run endless deployments without the financial plumbing, rates, refinancing, deficit tolerance starting to scream. Now zoom in. The U.S. fiscal outlook is bending toward interest cost dominance. The CBO's long-term outlook shows debt on a rising path with interest costs growing over time. The trend line is the point. The margin for error shrinks as interest costs eat more oxygen. So when you spend roughly $13, $3 billion to procure one Ford-class carrier, before you count the air wing, the escorts, the maintenance cycles, the munitions burn, and the decades-long operating bill, you aren't just buying steel. You're buying a strategic assumption that the system can protect a giant, centralized, irreplaceable symbol in the exact region your opponent has spent decades shaping into a cost trap. Now here's the inevitability statement, the part people hate, because it removes comfort. The carrier dilemma is not a policy accident. It is the next phase of a four-stage pattern that repeats across history with mechanical consistency. Stage 1. The dominant power builds an instrument of control that matches the last era's threats. It looks unbeatable because it solved the last war. Stage 2. Success becomes doctrine. Doctrine becomes identity. Identity becomes budget. The instrument grows more complex, more centralized, more expensive, and more emotionally sacred. It becomes a symbol you can't risk losing. Stage 3. The challenger doesn't try to beat the instrument symmetrically. They build a system around it. Geography, cheap sensors, cheap standoff pressure, political constraints. So the dominant instrument becomes trapped by its own value. You can't use it freely because the stakes are too high. Stage 4. The outcome? The dominant power either pulls back, escalates into a costly spiral, or suffers a symbolic shock that collapses credibility. In every version, the expensive instrument becomes a liability, not because it stopped being powerful, but because it became too important to lose. That's the machine. Now we prove it, fast, clean, and 3 times, because if it's real, it should replicate across eras, technologies, and empires. First proof, Athens and the Sicilian expedition, 415 to 413 BCE. Picture the logic, not the sandals. Athens becomes a naval commercial powerhouse. Its fleet isn't just hardware, it's the engine of empire. Tribute flows, trade protection, political leverage. Naval power isn't a tool, it's identity. That's stage 1, setup. Stage 2, expansion. After years of success, Athens starts confusing reach with destiny. They sell the Sicilian expedition as opportunity, wealth, leverage, a decisive strategic gain. But under the speeches is a psychological truth. Athens can't imagine not projecting power. If you don't sail, you look weak. If you don't expand, you feel like you're shrinking. Then stage 3 hits, crisis and loss of control. Syracuse and Sparta don't have to out-Athens in open water. They exploit distance, resupply fragility, local geography, time. Athens' fleet becomes stuck in an unfamiliar operating environment. Every day costs more. Every failure makes withdrawal more humiliating. The longer they stay, the more they must double down just to justify what they already spent. And stage 4, outcome. Athens loses ships, soldiers, credibility, and the myth of invincibility fractures. The defeat isn't only tactical. It rewrites what allies and enemies believe is possible. Here's the structural lesson. When your instrument becomes sacred and centralized, the wrong engagement becomes catastrophic, especially when the challenger can stretch time and geography until your advantage turns into a burden. Second proof, Britain, the Dreadnought era, and the debt commitment treadmill from early 1900s into the interwar period. Stage 1, setup. The Royal Navy is the guarantee of British global order. Sea control protects trade routes and empire arteries. Then HMS Dreadnought launches in 1906 and resets the naval balance. For a moment, Britain looks unassailable. Stage 2, expansion and overextension. Innovation triggers an arms race. Naval dominance becomes a treadmill, not a trophy. Keeping the margin requires constant shipbuilding, constant modernization, constant spending. Meanwhile, commitments multiply. Colonial obligations, alliance politics, global policing. Stage 3, crisis. World War I detonates the financial foundation. Britain wins, but at enormous cost. Post-war debt, economic strain, and political fatigue reshape the strategic environment. Sea power still matters, but now the system is constrained by finance and public tolerance. The instrument that once guaranteed freedom of action becomes hostage to budget arithmetic. Stage 4, outcome. Britain's ability to impose order erodes, not because ships stop floating, but because the empire's cost structure outgrows its revenue structure. The retreat isn't a single moment, it's a long bleed of options. Structural lesson. Overextension isn't just military, it's fiscal and political, and once your fiscal base weakens, your opponent doesn't need to defeat your navy everywhere. They only need to force painful choices in a few critical places. Third proof, the United States, Vietnam, and the monetary fracture of Bretton Woods. Stage 1, setup. After World War II, the U.S. builds a global security and monetary architecture. Military projection and dollar credibility reinforce each other. The system is so dominant it feels permanent. Stage 2, expansion. Commitments expand, alliances, deployments, wars. Vietnam becomes prolonged, expensive, and strategically ambiguous. The instrument, global projection, was assumed to be decisive. Stage 3, crisis. The challenger strategy is endurance, political friction, asymmetric cost. Not defeat America head-on, but make the war expensive enough, long enough, divisive enough that it contaminates confidence and drains political will. Meanwhile, the financial side strains. Maintaining the old promises becomes harder. Stage 4, outcome. The old monetary order breaks, the rules change, and even after Vietnam ends, the system is no longer operating under the same assumptions. Structural lesson. When overextension hits, the system doesn't just lose battles, it rewrites rules. Money, trust, credibility. Now compress all three proofs into one invariant sentence. When a dominant power builds a highly centralized, extremely expensive instrument of control, challengers stop trying to beat it directly and start trying to trap it by pushing it into environments where its use is politically constrained and its loss would be psychologically catastrophic. Now we apply it to today, step by step, coldly. America's Ford-class carrier isn't just a ship. It's the physical embodiment of a doctrine. Concentrated air power, mobile sovereignty, global presence. It signals, we can appear anywhere, project power, and impose order. Iran's trap is not sink the ship. Iran's trap is to make the ship's presence economically, politically, and operationally expensive, while keeping escalation unattractive for the US and terrifying for markets. Stage 1, modern setup. Post-Cold War carrier dominance works repeatedly in a world where few actors can contest it. Carriers become the default answer to crisis. Move the strike group, show the flag, demonstrate capability. It works, so it becomes habit, then doctrine, then identity. Now add the financial environment. Global debt is elevated, and debt-heavy systems hate persistent shocks. That means flexibility is reduced. Every prolonged deployment isn't only a military cost, it's a fiscal and political cost layered onto a system already stressed. Check. Stage 2, modern expansion and overextension. The platform becomes more complex, more expensive, because we demand it to do everything. Launch more sorties, survive more threats, integrate more systems, symbolize unstoppable power. The reported procurement cost for CVN-78 has been around $13. $3 billion in then-year dollars. But here's the hidden expansion that kills retention in most analyses. So pay attention. The ship is not the weapon. The weapon is the ecosystem. A carrier rarely moves alone. It carries an air wing. It requires escorts. It requires logistics and maintenance pipelines. And because it is sacred, it attracts the best defensive resources you have because you can't afford to lose it. So the true unit is the carrier strike group plus the political weight attached to it. And that creates concentration. A large portion of credibility concentrated into a few holes. That concentration is the vulnerability. Verified. Stage 3, crisis and loss of control. This is where Iran operates, not as a symmetric navy, but as a systems designer. Iran's goal is to turn the Persian Gulf region into an environment where costs are asymmetric and decisions are politically trapped. Geography is the first lever. Narrow waterways, proximity to shore, a choke point the world can't ignore. Authority check. In 2024, oil flows through the Strait of Hormuz averaged about 20 million barrels per day, around 20% of global petroleum liquids consumption, according to the U.S. Energy Information Administration. That means the battlefield isn't only military. It's energy prices, shipping insurance, inflation expectations, political stability. This is why the trap works. The U.S. can't treat this region like a normal theater where escalation is clean. Every move has market consequences. Every threat raises insurance. Every disruption hits inflation psychology. In a debt-heavy world, even modest price shocks transmit fast. Undeniable. Now the second lever, scalable, relatively low-cost pressure. Iran doesn't need to match the U.S. ship for ship. It needs persistent uncertainty, enough to raise the cost of staying, raise the risk of operating, and raise the political penalty of miscalculation. This is where people misunderstand modern warfare economics. The trap isn't one perfect strike. The trap is the cost curve. If an attacker can launch cheaper threats in volume, missiles, drones, mines, harassment, then the defender's burden becomes permanent. You must surveil everything. You must intercept. You must stay ready. And readiness is expensive, so even when nothing happens, you're still paying. Check. Now the third lever, political restraint. America's most valuable military assets are also America's most politically sensitive assets. The carrier is a national symbol. Even damage, forget sinking, would be a global headline earthquake. It would alter ally confidence in enemy calculations. It would become domestic political fire. That means USS. Decision makers are incentivized to avoid scenarios where the carrier is exposed to concentrated risk. And Iran benefits from that, without winning a battle. Iran benefits if the carrier has to operate farther away, launch fewer sorties, hold a higher defensive posture, or become more of a diplomatic signal than a practical instrument. Iran benefits if the U.S. becomes risk-averse in the one place where presence is supposed to deter. Verified. Stage 4, outcome. The instrument becomes a liability and you face a menu of bad options. Option 1, standoff. Pull the carrier farther out. Reduce exposure. Preserve the asset. But you also signal constraint. You show that persistent pressure can push the instrument back. Credibility softens from we can to we might. Option 2, escalation. Strike deeper, harder, more often. Impose costs. But escalation in a choke point theater carries blowback. Hormuz isn't just a map label, it's a global energy artery. Escalation risk translates into price spikes, insurance spikes, political spikes. Option 3, endurance. Stay present, absorb risk, accept long, expensive readiness burdens. But endurance collides with fiscal reality in a high-debt environment. None of these options feel like dominance. They feel like constraint management, undeniable. Now, here's the retention pivot most scripts miss, so don't click away. You might be thinking, okay, fine, but carriers still matter. America still has overwhelming power, so why call it a huge mistake? Because the mistake isn't the existence of carriers. The mistake is the belief that the old instrument can dominate the new machine at a sustainable cost. In the 20th century, power was often decided by who built the biggest platforms. In the 21st century, power is increasingly decided by who builds the best systems. Cheap sensors plus cheap effects multiplied by geography and politics. A carrier is an apex platform. Iran is playing system chess. And system chess has a brutal rule. You don't have to defeat the queen. You only have to restrict where the queen can safely move. Once the queen is pinned, the whole board changes. This is why Iran's trap is not hype. It's a design. The trap is built from 4 materials you can verify with your own eyes. 1, geography. Close-in waters compress reaction time and multiply threat vectors. 2, economics. A $13 billion hull is concentrated value. Defending concentrated value against scalable threats can create unfavorable cost curves. 3, markets. A choke point moving approximately 20 million barrels a day turns military risk into inflation risk and political risk. 4, psychology. The more sacred the asset, the more it constrains the hand holding it. Now here's the key insight. The carrier doesn't have to be sunk to be strategically defeated. It only has to be made too risky to use the way it was designed to be used. That is the whole pattern, expressed in one sentence. So what do you do with this? First, stop platform worship. The question isn't, is the carrier powerful? Of course it is. The question is, what is the cost curve of using it in this specific environment? If your opponent can spend 1 unit to force you to spend 10 units to remain safe, then time becomes the weapon. Second, watch the real strain indicators, not the speeches, not the rumors. Watch oil risk premium behavior, shipping advisories, and insurance costs. If markets start pricing persistent risk around choke points, that is the system telling you the trap is active. Third, understand the credibility mechanism. Deterrence is a probability model in everyone's head. The day your presence shifts from guaranteed freedom of action to conditional freedom of action, the world recalculates. Fourth, reject the comforting myths that always show up in stage 2. American exceptionalism will override arithmetic. No, exceptionalism can delay consequences. You can't erase cost curves, especially in a system already heavy with debt. Modern optimism will fix it. Optimism doesn't clear choke points. Optimism doesn't lower insurance premiums. Technology will save us. Technology helps defenders until it helps attackers scale cheaper pressure even faster. Now I promised you the single question that tells you whether we're entering the next stage, so here it is. Is the cost of maintaining presence rising faster than the political willingness to pay it? Because when that gap opens, the machine doesn't need a dramatic battle. It produces the outcome quietly. Standoff replaces dominance, caution replaces freedom, and symbolic assets become political hostages. And that is the real meaning of the huge mistake. Not that carriers are useless, but that in this theater, against this kind of systems opponent, a sacred, centralized, high-cost instrument becomes vulnerable to a strategy that wins without needing to destroy it. So here's your action. Position your mind ahead of the headline. The next time you see a carrier deployment into a geography engineered for asymmetric cost, don't ask who will win. Ask, what is the opponent's cost imposition loop, and how long can the dominant power pay the premium? Because the premium is the weapon. And if you want the next step, how the machine was built, how choke points become financial detonators, and what signals confirm we've crossed into stage 3, subscribe and watch the next video. Because once you recognize the machine, you stop being surprised by the headlines. You start forecasting them.